From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And here's today's lineup. K-State's Glynn Tonsor on the cattle markets this week. Glynn will report on the latest trends in domestic and export beef demand as per the latest USDA data. And he'll talk as well about the freshly updated K-State feeder cattle risk management tool and how you producers can make use of that in navigating the current economics. Then K-State's Terry Griffin will talk about new data that he has put together on trends in days suitable for farm work. He'll explain what that represents and how that information can be useful to you producers in making long-term equipment and other investment decisions. Also, Jeff Wickman joins us later for this week's 4-H segment, along with much more, here on Agriculture Today.
Have you ever wondered why livestock producers burn Kansas pasture? Here's the deal. Controlled burning helps preserve the prairie and allows every bite feeder cattle eat to be the most nutritious. National Wildlife and Parks also feel it is a necessity to help with wildlife populations.
So the next time you see a Kansas pasture burning, know it's for the good of our wildlife, our prairie, and our livestock. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for being along with us. Once again, this is Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. And along to share his latest thoughts on the cattle markets is livestock economist Glynn Tonsor of K-State Research and Extension. In a few moments, Glynn will fill us in on important updates to a tool that can help you producers manage risk for feeder cattle. But Glynn, the cattle markets this past week, well, the fed market held steady, the cash feeders not so much.
Yeah, that's correct. So let's start with the cash market and we'll work our way towards the wholesale beef market, which is making the headlines. Is, as you said, cash fed cattle about steady on the week, flat on the week, about 121. Compare that over the board. The nearby April live contract was just under 121. The board was down about 250 on the week. On the feeder cattle side of things, cash, the Kansas market was $3-4 lower, depending on what weight class and specific market you would use. Two lots I wrote down was 550-pound steers is 170 to 182. 750-pound steers, 141 to 149. Again, flat to lower. A couple of those were actually more like $5 lower on the week. We look over at the futures feeder cattle April contract, just below 140 for the week, down almost $5 for the week. So we definitely had some press back on feeder cattle prices and a mixed bag if you're following me between cash and futures on fed cattle. Some of that, I think, is a positive spillover that we're seeing in the cutout, which I'll give us in a second, and some is ongoing concerns about drought, corn, other things that are just uncertainties at the moment. So what was the cutout? Choice beef was $280 on Friday. It's up almost $4 for the week. And select was about $269, up $5 for the week. If I was to interject here, why is the cutout still going up when not everything else is? I think there's still an awful lot of ongoing discussion about restaurants trying to fill the pipeline. There's more and more restaurants opening up. And in aggregate, I think that's probably good for beef demand. We can't lose sight of that in general. The foot traffic optimism and so forth is part of that. How much of that is actually passed on directly to consumers versus restaurants just getting ready for those consumers coming is to be determined. And we got to monitor, I'm always bringing this, but the processing status. And we did have a bit of a hiccup. It was an intentional hiccup, but a couple weeks back. Mm-hmm. So this past week, the initial estimates AMS puts out through the week, including Saturday, was 640,000 head cattle slaughtered, right on par, 641,000 the week before. I'll pause and remind everybody it was this time last year that yours truly lost what little hair he had left. Was 486,000 head. We were pushing our way towards the end of April. The harvesting challenges were real in April of 2020. So we look a lot better, obviously, on the processing side than then. But the week I want to hone in on for a moment is the week ending April 3rd of this year was 604,000 head federal inspected cattle slaughter. We had a temporary pinch in the volume that was processed. That was coupled with the ongoing discussion of restaurant refilling, the demand to get the freezers ready. That certainly is boosting the cutout, and I think that's probably the number one driver of why the cutout's been strong the last couple of weeks.
Is this to infer, then, that the cutout will slip some here in the relative near future, or will that refilling of the beef pipeline continue for a while?
Well, yeah, so I'll remind everybody before I give a definitive answer is there's three market channels. So the domestic food service, which is what we're talking about, that pipeline being refilled, domestic retail, and then exports. And we've we've had notable export challenges throughout 2021. A lot of that is logistical. I think there's some reasons to be optimistic that the logistical supply side of exports is going to improve, because that would actually be supportive of not just the cutout, but everything in the industry to hold prices up. That might offset some if we have pullback on the food service bump. The strength in the food service getting ready for reopening can't go on forever, because at some point we're going to be restocked. But I do think it has some legs. So coastal states, and everybody talks about California, so we'll just use an example right now. California is far from wide open for business today. Conversely, say Texas is another big state we've been talking about for some time, has been quote-unquote open for business for a while. So the restaurants in Texas getting ready for foot traffic, they're probably ready in there. California has yet to go through this. So I do think we have some more weeks. I don't know how many months of this, but some more weeks ahead of us on the restaurants getting ready. But at the end of the day, to support the current cutout, I think we need some improvement in exports.
We've more numbers on beef demand, which we'll get into in just a second. Before we do that, get us caught up on your latest cattle feedlot returns. You've the fresh numbers in there, and we will see profits again, and in fact should be this month, should we not?
Yeah, so these are posted on our Ag Manager website, updated once a month. The latest numbers as of April 11th. As noted in the past, those are there. Please make use of them. And these are risk management free, so you're paying cash, taking cash for corn feeders, fed cattle. The punchline of this story is the second quarter closeouts, so cattle coming out April, May, and June here of 2021, the projected margins I'm putting out are better than a month ago. So specifically, if you pull this report up that's out now, the April closeouts are $57 per steer. These are positive net returns, $160 actually for May and $74 for June. All three of those are up notably, $30 or $40 per head improvement compared to same exercise 1 month earlier. What's behind that? It's mainly fed cattle price improvement. Cost of gain are still high, is my word of caution here. We're hovering around $100. I always say it's important to know your own cost of gain compared to that. It's probably even more important to reinforce that right now, because those that might have some forage access challenges or whatever, depending on where you're listening to on this right now, it's going to be really important to monitor your cost. But the second quarter looks positive and better than it did a month ago. That is a good story for the feedlot sector.
And that black ink will likely continue, you say, according to the latest numbers, into the early fall.
Yeah, it's forecasted to be positive until we get to October at this point.
All right. You can check out those numbers at agmanager.info, of course. The demand updates, this is USDA data for both domestic and export beef demand, and those numbers suggest that beef is losing some ground on both levels.
It does. Now, keep in mind, these are compared to the year before. So what I have most recently, as you said, based upon USDA's regular data here, is for February, beef demand domestically was down 3% compared to February of 2020, which is important to note. That's in many ways our last pre-COVID period. I would call March of 2020 the start of the COVID effects in our industry. Pork was up 8%, chicken down 6% in that year-over-year sense. When you contrast that with the export front, this is where some of my calls for improvement come from, is February of 2021, beef export demand was down 15% compared to February of 2020, pork down 24%, chicken down 2%. Underneath that is logistical challenges. We're not being able to get product where we want, and some uncertainty in a more broader sense about global demand. ASF renewals in China and so forth are all part of this broader discussion. I remain optimistic as 2021 persists that general GDP-type activity will spill over into positive protein demand, and that will in turn lead to the world wanting beef and pork in particular to come out of the U.S. So I think we're going to see some improvement on that, but we're not without risk on that, of course. Most important to that is the strength of the U.S. dollar, global economic activity, and trade relations. All three of those are ripe with uncertainty, of course, to monitor. But on balance, I'm optimistic that the export front is going to pull prices up as we move throughout 2021.
We'll look for signals of that as we move forward then. And we do want to spend the balance of our time talking about the K-State Feeder Cattle Risk Management Tool. You maintain this on the agmanager.info website. It's recently updated. Refresh us on this tool and how it can be a benefit to the producer.
Yeah, so for our longtime listeners, you'll remember Dr. Kevin Duvetter, who was a long mainstay here in the department. He originally built this, and now I maintain it. I highlight that because it was built as part of a project he had done and others with USDA RMA. RMA offers the LRP product, so livestock revenue protection, which is one way to get price protection on feeder cattle, but it's not the only way. So you can have a direct hedge in the futures market, you can buy a put option, and you can have fancier approaches that are also built into the tool, but I'm going to hone in on those. And of course, you can have the strategies. I just call it the cash strategy. It's don't protect, just take what the cash market gives me. This tool is designed for somebody that's going to sell feeder cattle at some point in the future who wants to compare what we think will be the net expected selling price of each of those alternative approaches. So the do-nothing cash strategy, hedge of the futures market, buy a put option, buy the LRP product, which is kind of insurance via the government. That's the point of this tool. It's Excel decision tool. You open it up, tailor it for your situation. And I recently updated it because feeder cattle prices have improved since it was last updated in December. Some of our listeners pointed out, and I got some emails saying the prices are out of whack, please update it. So you will find that is updated to reflect the situation as of the middle of April. If you were going to sell 600-pound calves, I use Salina, in the middle of October, you could tweak that story for yourself, but if you want to know what the defaults are when you open it up, that's what it reflects. And it is showing the expected net selling price, again, of each of those strategies. And I don't want to bore everybody with the specific numbers. It's important to understand that's the point of this. The punchline today would be, and I'll interject LMIC on this regular segment, our listeners get to hear from LMIC regularly, is the latest forecast the LMIC put out dated April 11th for the fourth quarter of 2021, put Southern Plains calf prices at $165, $167. That is a price that is hedgeable per this tool today. So I'm not sitting here telling everybody to hedge that, but if you believe that forecast is reasonable and you're comfortable with that for your operation, you could use this decision tool to examine sort of what price risk management hedging approach fits you the best. That's the point of this tool. Even if you don't think it's time to hedge, I would encourage you to use this tool to figure out what it would cost you, use it to monitor, periodically update it. The example I used was for somebody that sells calves in the fall, hence my middle October Salina 6-weight. You can do the exact same thing for cattle coming off grass. They'd be heavier weights at a different date. You use the tool the same way, and I hope users find it useful.
It's a great resource for comparing your risk management alternatives for those feeders. It spells it out pretty clearly as to which of the alternatives will best work for your situation and your expectations. It's the Feeder Cattle Risk Management Tool. Find it as well at agmanager.info. As always, Glynn, good comments. Thanks for sharing them.
Thanks for having me on, Eric.
With this week's cattle market segment, livestock economist Glynn Tonsor, K-State Research and Extension. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Kansas farmers and ranchers are helping feed your family in the world. The largest contributor to the Kansas economy is beef cattle. How do you get that juicy steak on your plate? In order for you to enjoy your tasty meal, it requires the hard work of the producers, marketers, advertisers, processors, inspectors, transporters, packers, and consumers. So thank all these people and sit back, relax, and enjoy your tasty meal.
Next up for you on this Agriculture Today, we'll dig into more information that's available to you producers on K-State's agmanager.info website. This is something that was pulled together a few years back, and it can be a useful source of information for you producers. Joining us once more is a precision agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension, Terry Griffin. Terry has been maintaining this data and has just added to it with an updated version of it. What it is, Terry, is days suitable for farm field work. What is the data set and what is the significance of it?
And so the data set all comes from the USDA, National Ag Statistics Service. Specifically, every week, Kansas has a crop progress and condition report. And in the first few sentences of that report, it tells us how many days suitable that farmers in Kansas had to enter and conduct field work across their fields. And this data goes back many decades. Electronically on USDA QuickStat, it goes back to 1995 for nearly all states across the country.
And the thinking behind providing that kind of information, how would you characterize that?
Well, so it's a type of information that may not be applicable on a daily basis. It's not something used to make in-field decisions, but it's useful for farm management purposes. And the idea is when we're making a 5-year plan, if when we're trying to match equipment to the acreage we have that we anticipate operating, this is the type of information that is really useful. So we know when we look at the calendar, there are 7 days in each week. Unfortunately, we don't have 7 days each week to conduct field work. It's somewhere between 0 and 7. And if you've been following my work with Days Suitable since I've been in Kansas, I've been here 6 years now, we've been plotting the current year's observation for Days Suitable against a long-term probability to see if we're hovering about normal around the median, or if we're really low, close to the 20th percentile, or is it really dry and we're at or above the 80th percentile. So that's the first step. And I get a lot of questions about this, and usually the question is really saying, Griffin, so what? And that's what I wanted to chat about today.
Yeah. Well, there's the question. So what?
All right.
And how is this relevant to the producer then?
Okay, so we added a second chart this week, and I want to tell everybody about it. So when we go to Ag Manager and click on Days Suitable for Field Work for all states, and that's one of the part that we wanted to cover, is that it's not just Kansas. There's a drop-down box that users can select Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, California, whatever you're interested in. And the states that have available data is plotted here in that current 2021 data versus all the other long-term trends. And I wanted to, humble brag that the 2021 data is automated. I don't have to update it anymore. There's a live link to USDA so every Monday or Tuesday, it gets updated all on its own. The second graph allows the user to take a closer look. So any given week is great, but really producers are interested in several weeks at a time. So for instance, you think about your part of the state, when corn is typically planted or when soybeans are typically harvested. There's a 3, 4, 8 week time period that you're interested in. Well, the second chart allows you to select a beginning and end date. I want to emphasize that these dates are week ending. So if you say, April 1st, it's going to be the week ending April 1st, which would be including the entire last week of March. So the user chooses the beginning and ending dates, and the math looks at how many days happened during that time period each year in the past. And so there's a histogram, a new chart, and it shows us how many years of data was available and the number of fieldwork days. And it gives us an idea of what we can legitimately expect. So, if we open up the browser, it's going to say Kansas for an 8-week period, which is 56 calendar days. In that 56 calendar days, we cannot assume that we can get into the field 56 days. Mm-hmm. And on average, the median may be 36, 35. It's something less than 56. And so the user can change the state, change the beginning and ending dates. And the graph also tells us is the vertical blue line I've added, that's the median. It's kind of what we'd expect on average. And a vertical green line that's at the 20th percentile, and which is pretty low. But when people ask me, Griffin, what kind of year should we expect when we're equipping a farm for a 5-year planning model? Well, it's definitely not the 50th percentile. We don't want to get done planting in our expected time period half the time, right? But we also can't plan on the 0 percentile because that would be very costly to have enough equipment to plant everything in one day. And so there's a benefit cost economics going on. So I've got this little area shaded green, and somewhere in that shaded green area is kind of a rule of thumb that economists over decades have kind of argued about. But it kind of tells us we should use that number of days in our calculations when we're planning on how many acres that we can cover in that time period. And then with that information, we have a better idea of how much equipment would be matched to a given amount of acreage.
That is really useful information if producers step back, think about how they might employ those trends. Do you find with this body of data going back so many years, Terry, that there are consistencies in those historical patterns for a given stretch of time, say spring or summer, what have you?
Sure. If you're asking me if we have evidence of climate change here, I want to say we don't have enough years of data. So right. For the states that we bring the data in electronically from QuickStats, go back to 1995. So we're looking at 25 years of data. It's not a long term, it's not hundreds of years, it's 25 years, which is pretty long. But that's exactly the next graph that we're going to release with the next enhancement that hopefully will be done in a couple of weeks. We can come back and talk about. But we plotted each year and run a regression line to see if there is a trend, if the slope is increasing or decreasing for certain time periods. And yes, some are increasing, some are decreasing, and they're not all significant. And the question I have is, do the changes over time in days suitable for field work, when they're improving, meaning we get more days, is it weather related or is it technology related? Does flotation tires and tractors and no-till operations affect the number of days suitable that's reported over time? And that's my question is, does the technology impact what gets reported?
Looking forward to that added feature to the tool that you'll be sharing here, hopefully, like you say, in a couple of weeks. This is those state-level data. It can be valuable at the local level. That's your point here.
Sure is. And again, it's not something we'd use mid-season. It's not like we'd wake up tomorrow and check this to see what we're going to do today. It's not meant for that. Mm-hmm. It's meant for farm management planning. When we're making our long-term decisions with equipment and acreage, this is where we'd use this tool.
And it's free for the use at Ag Manager. It's as simple as going to the website.
It is. It's available, I guess, anywhere on the planet with the internet connection. You can. There's no logins required. Just go to the website and click away. We don't collect any data from it, so you're no privacy concerns.
Very good. But it is, again, live. It is updated regularly. It is interactive in this sense. Are the links to it handy on Ag Manager, Terry?
They are. We're working on that. So if we go to Ag Manager, we click on Farm Management, click on Machinery, and then click on Days Suitable for Field Work, all states. It will take us to that particular tool.
Again, agmanager.info, click on Farm Management, then Machinery. Then you're to the link Days Suitable for Field Work. It really is something that you producers might want to look at as you, as Terry says, are coming to conclusions and decisions on long-term potential investments in farm field machinery and allied decisions that would go into that. Do take advantage of what Terry has put together at agmanager.info, and we're looking for that next iteration of it, Terry, coming out soon. Thanks for telling us about it. Keep up the good work, and we will visit with you in a few weeks down the line.
I will see you then, Eric. Thank you.
He is a precision agricultural economist. K-State Research and Extension is Terry Griffin, who is the key author of this tool for you producers to fully capitalize on the trends in days suitable for field work in Kansas and other states as well now. You are tuned in to Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University. When we come back, we'll have a look at today's agricultural news headlines for you. And once more, awaiting with this week's Kansas 4-H segment is Jeff Wickman. So please stay with us. This is the K-State Radio Network.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects, so avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. over the K-State Radio Network, which is now in its 97th year of broadcast service to agriculture here in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson here. Now, today's agricultural news headlines, these courtesy in part of DTN. And trade was in focus last week as U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai delivered remarks on trade to two different groups, and the ranking Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee, Kevin Brady of Texas, also offered up his views on trade issues, the two focusing on different areas, though. Tai spoke to the Center for American Progress and laid out a view that climate has to become a component in global trade policy. She said the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement should serve as a template, even as she called it a glaring omission in the trade deal that she helped move through Congress that it does not explicitly mention climate change. Meantime, Brady told the Center for Strategic and International Studies that the U.S. needs to get off the sidelines on trade. That's a reference to the Biden administration signaling that they're not focused on negotiating new trade deals. Brady saying he believes the first step is to renew, without delay, Trade Promotion Authority, for which all practical purposes, he says, has already expired. He went on to say that every president of any party should have that important tool, in Brady's words. He chided the administration for not giving any indication of completing trade negotiations started under the Trump administration with the United Kingdom, with Kenya, and with Japan. An estimated 334,000 COVID cases are attributable to meatpacking plants, resulting in $11.2 billion in economic damage. That according to a new study led by a researcher at the University of California, Davis. The study found that beef and pork processing plants more than doubled per capita infection rates in counties that had them. Chicken processing plants increased transmission rates by 20%. The study looked at specifically large meatpacking plants generating more than 10 million pounds per month. Researchers said that both the economic impact and the infection rate estimate would be conservative. The study looked at infection rates within a county and did not account for cases that might have been contracted at a meatpacking plant but spread to other counties. Similarly, their study likely understates the true economic losses, according to the lead author, Tina Santone, a livestock and rangeland economist at UC Davis. The study looked at lost wages and mortality, did not include long-term health care costs or costs for measures put in place to protect worker safety. Now, Satoni said while they did see an initial ramp-up in cases attributable to meatpacking facilities over time, infection rates were the same per capita as counties without them, partly because meatpacking plants did implement, she says, a lot of protocols to protect employees. Increased COVID transmission rates have prompted some critics to call for a smaller and more geographically dispersed industry to make it less susceptible to a pandemic and massive disruptions in the food supply chain. The researchers caution that such a move would come at a price, adding costs to a system designed to eliminate them and ultimately increasing food prices. Economists instead suggest research and investigation into the automation and technological innovations that made the poultry segment of the industry more resilient to the COVID pandemic. The study co-authors, by the way, include Alex Schaefer with Michigan State University and Daniel Scheitram of the University of Arizona. The United States, Canada, and Mexico are holding simultaneous illuminations, as they're calling them, to show their support for plant health. Here's more on that from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
It's not only Invasive Plant Pest and Disease Awareness Month in April.
It coincides with the International Year of Plant Health, which is a global awareness campaign led by the United Nations.
That was Osama El-Lissi, Deputy Administrator with USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. He says the United States, Canada, and Mexico will hold simultaneous illuminations
to demonstrate our unified commitment to protecting agriculture and natural resources from devastating plant pests and diseases.
Besides each country lighting up buildings in green,
we are also scheduled a special Niagara Falls illumination on April 19th and 20th on both the U.S. and the Canadian sites. The falls will glow green from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. for 15 minutes at the top of each hour.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And a bill called the Haulers of Agriculture and Livestock Safety Act, or HALS Act of 2021, has been introduced in the House of Representatives this past week. This bill is a companion to legislation introduced in the Senate last month. The HALS Act would add a 150 air mile radius exemption under hours of service regulations to the back end of hauls for those transporting livestock or agricultural commodities. This legislation would also eliminate the seasonal harvest requirements for the agriculture hours of service exemption, making it available year-round in all states, and updates and clarifies the definition of an agricultural commodity at the same time. Current hours of service rules allow for 11 hours of drive time, 14 hours of on-duty time, and then require 10 consecutive hours of rest. When transporting livestock, there's a need for further flexibility beyond the current hours of service, as haulers cannot idle or unload their trucks when drive time hours run out without jeopardizing animal health and welfare. Calendar item, K-State's Sheep and Goat Management Series will continue this week with a meeting scheduled for 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, April the 20th. This will be at the Norton County 4-H building in Norton. The topics will include sheep and goat nutrition, health, kidding and lambing, and more. One can attend in person or can take in the program via Zoom, but they're asking you to register for that right away at the Twin Creeks Extension District office in Norton, 785-475-8121, 785-475-8121. Again, that session is taking place tomorrow starting at 5 o'clock, Norton County 4-H building in Norton. And the final meeting of this Sheep and Goat Management Series is set for a week from tomorrow. It'll run from 6 to 8 that evening of the 27th at the Dole Specter Conference Center in Russell. The topics there will include health, nutrition, and management considerations for a sheep and meat goat enterprise, along with forage sampling considerations and sampling technique. There's a $5 registration cost per person. It's due by April the 26th, which would be a week from today. And to RSVP, contact the Midway Extension District office in Russell, 785-483-3157, 785-483-3157. This is Agriculture Today. Jeff Wickman is standing by with this week's Kansas 4-H segment for you here on the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Several Kansas 4-H horse events were recently held virtually. Although some modifications had to be made for the virtual events, Kansas 4-H Youth Program Coordinator Shannon Rogge says this year's hippology and the Quiz Bowl were both very successful and enabled more youth to participate. Shannon, things are kind of gearing up in terms of horse competitions and horse events, and going on just recently was the virtual hippology and Quiz Bowl.
Yes, that's correct. So we just wrapped up that, both virtual hippology and virtual Quiz Bowl. Hippology is the study of the horse, so they tested their knowledge with different, what we call phases. So they have like a multiple choice exam, and then they look at images to be sure that they can identify colors and breeds and equipment. And then they also have what we call stations, which is usually when they look at a little bit more disease-oriented medical, so that they can identify, if their horse got sick and they went out there and they had a little bit of knowledge where maybe they could identify what the symptoms are, what's wrong with it, and then they could work with their vet to move forward from there. That's what our hippology is. So it's very, very good for all youth to be studying and compete in that. So it was a little bit more difficult, I think, because we had to convert all of that to online version. But they did really well. There weren't a lot of problems. And so I think it opened the door for those that maybe normally can't go to Rock Springs because of travel or timing. It was a different opportunity for them as well. And then our virtual quiz bowl is kind of similar. I mean, it's testing their knowledge, but just like any Scholars Bowl or anything like that, you have the buzzer, you have the team camaraderie, and it's a really fun environment for them to have a contest that way as well.
It's always a little bit of a give and take when it comes to the virtual world, but it has worked out quite well, and even for the horse project, it's worked out quite well.
Yes, absolutely. So we used the format that was very successful last summer with livestock sweepstakes, and then also other states have used it, such as Utah, Missouri. So we had quite a bit to kind of go off of and learn from their mistakes and their learning curves. So we felt like we were as prepared as we could be going into it.
Did you have to make any adjustments rules-wise?
We made a few, but for the most part, it was very similar, especially on the Quiz Bowl side. Most of any rule changes that we had to make were just making sure that when they buzzed in, they were recognized by the moderator. Since we couldn't see them in person, we really had to be careful about knowing exactly who was getting ready to speak and where points were being awarded. So we just asked them to be very patient and very considerate of that, and we implemented some rules to reinforce that. That was about it. For the most part, the rules stayed the same. It was just the format and the technology that changed.
And the Quiz Bowl has a qualifying exam?
The Quiz Bowl did this year. At Rock Springs, we have everyone go through the normal bracket, which is a double elimination bracket for them. But because it takes a little bit longer to get everything set up virtually for Quiz Bowl, we decided to have a preliminary exam. It was just a 50-point multiple choice for senior, 35 for open, where they would go through, and then we would take the 4 highest teams from that, and then we would go into the Quiz Bowl. So that was a little different just because of the time constraints and making sure that everything was working correctly. So that was one change for the Quiz Bowl side.
So you had then the semifinals and the finals live?
Yes, we did. Yep, we had that live on Sunday the 11th.
In terms of a qualifying event, this is a national qualifier?
Yep, so this is one of our qualifying events. It is a statewide contest, so these kids in the senior division are competing to go to national contests. The national 4-H contest is held in Denver at the National Western Stock Show in January, so they will be gearing up for that in January of 2022 based on this event.
Youth involved in the Horse Project are also wrapping up speech contest as well.
Yes, they are wrapping that up. That is another qualifier. So the seniors that are giving demonstrations and public speaking, they are competing for a spot to head to Denver as well with that if they would like.
And that's also being done over Zoom?
It is. It's live over Zoom, so they can still have the feedback from the judge and work it around their schedule, around sports and stuff. So we're trying to make that doable for them as well.
So how does that work? They write the speech themselves, deliver the speech?
Yes, they do write it. So it's either a demonstration where they're trying to demonstrate something, whether it's safe handling, a medical procedure, a basic medical procedure that an owner might do, or public speaking, which is usually history of a horse, maybe some breed history, some more textbook type knowledge. And those are kind of the 2 main different categories that they build from. And then they have about 7 to 10 minutes to present that.
So that's a fairly long speech in my book.
It definitely is. I remember when I was doing speeches in high school that you write it for 5-10 minutes and you always talk it in 3. So it's definitely challenging. They have to really prepare and think through that. But we follow the same rules that National does for their time frame.
And great experience. I mean, this is something that they will use moving forward.
Absolutely. Public speaking skills are always in need as they move forward in their life. But even today, as we've seen in the last year, being able to present over Zoom and understand the technology and maybe the challenges of everyone listening differently and connections, that's very valuable for them as well. As they'll be moving forward, they're probably going to have more interviews online and just have to communicate that way. So it is very valuable for them.
What lies ahead for those in the horse project? Is it mostly down to county fairs now?
We have one more contest this month, which is horse judging, a state contest. That is also a national qualifier. And then that kind of wraps up our contest season, and then we move into district horse shows in the month of June and early July. Those district horse shows are their way to qualify for the state fair. And then in July and August, they'll have their county fairs, which are many times more of a fun show format.
And if anyone is interested in the horse project area, they can find more information online.
That is correct. We do have several horse project pages where they can find information. And if they don't find what they're looking for, they can always reach out, and we will be happy to help them.
That's Kansas 4-H Youth Program Coordinator Shannon Rogge with an update on recent and upcoming horse events. Again, for more information, contact your local county or district extension office or visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.